Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, weather fans. Fix my camera here a little bit. I was taking a look at the GFS models for today, and I read the description of the next couple days from the Storm Prediction Center and the National Weather Service, and they were attributing some severe weather outlooks going into next week. Going into this coming week. First out in this region of the Northwest, the Midwest, I'm sorry. Just woke up having the coffee. Anyways, in the Midwest, there is an enhanced risk for severe weather, and I can go ahead and actually pull that up for you. Just get to their site real quick here. Go to the National Weather Service's page. You can see that as far that's the day 3 outlook, and they already have slight risk, not an enhanced risk, sorry, but the slight risk area for that kind of upper portion of Oklahoma, a lot of that southeastern portion of Kansas, and a little bit of Missouri and Arkansas in there as well, and then with that kind of marginal risk around there. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that. This is not the NAM model. This is the extended GFS model. We're still, pretty much 4 days out. So this is going to be a kind of hit or miss, close correlation to the weather that's going to be pulling through here next week. So we're going to go ahead and start this. Right now we are looking at the, we're going to look at, this is the end of the 4th of today, going into tomorrow. But let's continue on, and I'll show you how this kind of changes. And so you're watching this low pressure system right here. So there isn't kind of like a mid to upper level trough that's going to be pulling through here, and that low is going to attribute some of that severe weather that's going to be starting to form out in the Midwest. You can see this kind of stuff building here from that low that's way up there in the north, and none of this is really attributed to any kind of really severe weather. Cap is still pretty good and everything, so definitely going to have some thunderstorm development that's going to be coming up here. So I would attribute that to probably a lot of snowfall that's going to be up there. So the precipitation is probably going to be a little bit heavier, on the heavier side up there with that storm coming through there. So, and that kind of blows through in this kind of winding tail, and it kind of pulls all these spotty isolated areas around the precipitation storms going through there. Nothing really on the high end of severe weather until this low kind of pulls into the Midwest. But I kind of wanted to show you what happens when this low does pull into the Kansas and Oklahoma region. And then you got this kind of isolated building that's going on there north of the low, which isn't going to have too much severe potential because of this high pressure system and the snow and everything behind it. Cooler temperatures, that front is going to be coming through there, and that's going to kind of, that's kind of the spotty kind of uncomfortableness before the storm approaches. And then you start to get this, the stuff that's attributing around this low as it moves through the Midwest. And as this is, it is on the severe levels because it's marginal tornado risk in some areas and everything, but the cap is still pretty good. And that's what I was kind of, it's still holding its cap pretty well. And then this happens. All right, so now you can see that, now you can see all that kind of wrapping around the low, where it's at. So then you find these little positions in here, and not all of them are there, but usually on the back of that line right here in that area, and that's where you're going to find these little pockets of instability, where you get this marginal tornado risk. Cap is getting a little bit weaker. It's not really holding out as well. All right, so, well, let's go back one frame. Let me show you. There's a couple places here going into Arkansas where you're going to have some severe weather. Cap is a little bit better on that. LCL height is still pretty high. So, yeah, and then the demographics kind of change as far as that is concerned. Now you're starting to have a little bit more building here in upper Kansas. It's going to be pulling through the lower end of Kansas as well. And you see that, you know, in some places cap is holding really well. Let's go into Arkansas here. And this is let's see here, this is 12Z on the 7th. In Missouri, getting a little bit of this thick green stuff here, but that looks like general thunderstorm development. And you got this pretty straight line across that boundary line there that's going to be pulling through ahead of the low, and that starts to build uh, in cooperation with an additional low that's coming up from the south. Now, I'll do the temperatures as well going into this week through these models, and I'll show you the kind of changes in temperatures. But you know, we got a pretty significant warm sector that's going on down here. So with, you know, heat advection and moisture return from the Gulf of Mexico, with these kind of temperatures that are going to be down here, you know what I mean, into the mid to upper 70s, you know, we're looking at some pretty warm weather. So that is going to really set the table for severe weather to roll out. And that's what we're kind of concerned about. Okay, so now you can see this, you know, kind of curl that's going around this low, almost like a, you know, land cyclone right here. And this is where you're going to have development of some of that severe weather forming along this line as it moves to the east and southeast. So we're going to look at the south end of this line, primarily this one here, and this is where some significant severe weather development is supposed to take shape here. Now, the last video I did, I looked at this forecast model about a week out. And so these models are never traditionally, they're not massively accurate looking a week out. You know what I mean? But it did give me a general idea of, you know, ballpark areas of where we're looking at some of the highest severe weather. And what I have seen is mid to lower Mississippi Valley, some of the southern portions, or even some of the northern portions actually of Louisiana, at least at first until it blows through, and then you got some of the southeast regions, excuse me, of Louisiana that will have severe weather from that as well. The question that I have, because it's so far out, is what is going to be happening past the Mississippi line with these storms going into Alabama and Georgia. That's what I'm trying to figure out. And even this, you know, even the Storm Prediction Center said that there's, you know, contradicting models with this, and they suggest certain things, but you know, the unpredictability is a little bit too low at this point. So we're gonna have to see how it develops going into the next couple of days, and then by day 3 or day 2, going into that probably Monday or Tuesday, we'll know a lot more about what's going on with the system as it goes into Alabama and Georgia, as well as the Florida Panhandle and the northern Florida kind of region here. Because the last time that I checked this too, in the last video, around the Florida Panhandle, going around Tallahassee somewhere, there was severe weather and severe levels that were that it was showing in those areas as well. There's kind of a window of opportunity where it goes through Tallahassee, and then after that, it seems like it kind of tapers off as far as the severe levels, and then most of it is over the Gulf of Mexico, which is, you know, neither here or there, because it seems like it was weakening as it moves further east towards the Gulf of Mexico, and then you got general thunderstorm development. But nothing too bad anyways in the window of severe convection. So let's look at this line as it kind of pulls through Louisiana. And then you'll start to see these tornado risks that's pulling up. Got a little bit of that hook that's going on in this dynamic here. Updraft seems pretty good. So you got some significant supercell development, some significant hail threat, and that's just on the southern end of this line. This is, let's see here, Wednesday, 21Z. So going into that, let's go a little higher in the line, right in the pretty much middle of, pretty much getting the same thing there. All right, moving a little bit further north, we're going up to the line of Louisiana and lower Mississippi. And then you still see that supercell development and that hail potential. That hook is pretty pronounced in this, you know, these demographics and this data. You know what I mean? The updraft looks good, and tornado threat gets a little bit more significant, a little bit higher on the scale. LCL height is really low, so you definitely have that favorable. All right. Well, let's hang on. Let me All right, let's go up into. So now we're on the edge of Arkansas and Mississippi. Pretty much the same readings there. Let's go up. Let's see here, Tennessee, Arkansas. Yeah, pretty much the same thing. So this to me looks like this is the period where it's starting to get into that warm sector. It's starting to get that moisture return, and now it's building into the system it's going to become. You know what I mean? It's just kind of collecting all that moisture and sucking it in, and then it's just going to start, developing further into what it's going to become over the next day or so. All right, next frame, we're looking at the 8th, about 7 in the morning, 00Z. 7:30 in the morning. We're looking at the lower end of that line now. Still a pretty significant tornado threat right there. Got some supercell development, a little bit on the lower scale. You got one indication of significant supercell development. The rest of it's kind of weak at this point, but still, an apparent tornado threat there. All right, now let's look ahead of all this thunderstorm development right here. We're going to look ahead of that line, and then you got marginal tornado risk there. Because the system is kind of back building in these areas here. But let's look at this line behind the storm, the thunderstorm development. You got marginal tornado risk now. But in all of these frames, lifting condensation is pretty low. So that is going to be a big indicator, along with the other dynamics of wind shear, coupled with moisture return, temperature. I mean, it really depends on the dew points in these areas when this kind of thing goes through, because those dew points are going to make a significant difference as far as how the severe weather is going to develop here. So then we got thunderstorm, pretty strong thunderstorm development. That's all in here. You know what I mean? With marginal tornado risk, it looks like. So there are tornadoes possible going across the northern portion of Mississippi through that time. You know what I mean? We're looking at Wednesday going into Thursday, and some of those overnight periods, you could have a couple of tornadoes, maybe on the lower end of things, not significant tornadoes, but it still could happen. And then along this line, the further north that you go, it seems like it's not as strong, it's not as stable, not as unstable. The instability is a little bit limited going through there. All right, so these southeast regions, this is the regions that we're paying attention to the most about the severe weather kind of rolling through. All right, now we're getting into the mid to lower Mississippi region, and this is different than the last model that I looked at. All right, so there was one frame that I looked at where the tornado threat was pretty significant, and I'm trying to figure out when that was. I think that was actually behind us here, so let's take a look at that. All right, this is a little bit higher. But there was another one. There was another frame that I had discovered earlier that was a little bit higher on the spectrum here. On the scale here. Going into Arkansas. It's still just kind of building up at this point there. Alright, now let's take a look. Right on the corner of Arkansas and Louisiana. Let's look in between those lines. So, the low-end tornado threats, it looks like through and through. Still got pretty significant supercell development, which is going to, it's going to be supported for tornado development later on throughout the system. As it kind of moves east, it kind of, treks along because you're having those supercells develop. And sometimes they can take a little bit of time, you know what I mean, to drop tornadoes and become a real threatening system. Marginal tornado risks. Let's look on the edge on the northern edge of this. It seems like it kind of tapers off in severity as you go a little bit further north and a little bit further east. But I'm trying to look at the atmospherics in between, see how it's going to develop from here. Alright, so lower Mississippi. Yeah, these levels are not as high as about a week ago from what I was seeing here. Gets into northern Georgia, and then it seems like that kind of tapers off in severity as far as we can see right there. So we are at Wednesday 15Z. I'm sorry, it's Thursday. Thursday 15Z. This is Thursday 18. Looks like just rain. So some severe potential, it looks like, but kind of on the lower things. All right, so this, then we got this building up in Louisiana right here. And that is coming from the southwest. And a marginal tornado threat. All right, with that as well. Like in mid-Louisiana. That is going into Friday, 03. Got some of that precipitation build up in northern Mississippi. Marginal tornado risks. Got some supercell development in there. LCL is pretty low. And then that kind of descales, increases in the precipitation in some places as well. Marginal threat levels. A little bit of development going into Tennessee there, and into the North Georgia regions. North and mid. Going into southern Georgia. Tallahassee and the Florida Panhandle. So these levels are not actually as high. It doesn't look like, anyways. It doesn't look like they're as high as the one that is when I looked at this model about a few days ago, about a week out from the actual event. And then it just gets kind of, scattered over the Gulf of Mexico, which, could be a good thing or a bad thing, because you can get isolated supercell development in these things, as they kind of go around, depending on what the wind shear is doing, and our, our humidity, what's going on with our moisture return, and our dew points at that point. And we're going to have the warm sector. It's going to be warm pretty much in all of these areas. So that heat is going to be there, and it's going to be significant for that storm development going into these regions. But nothing that I'm seeing is really on the high severe level, even with some of the severe risks, you know what I mean? Then you got some, heavy rainfall. And then look at this. Looks like going into the 10th. Got a low development over the Florida Panhandle. And it's got this kind of curvy kind of structure here. That's, kind of interesting. Could be some winds ahead of that. Nothing, excuse me, nothing that looks really severe with it, but you still could have some heavier winds attributed with that bowing. And a lot of these systems, you could kind of see that. Let's go back to, let's say, the 6th. As we're going through here. Was a couple of segments I wanted to show you here. But, even in like this segment here, you're seeing that where it's kind of a bowed structure like this. That's where you're going to usually get some pretty high winds that are across that. So those severe levels, those marginal severe levels of threat anyways in those areas, even without tornadoes, you could still have some high winds in here. It looks like there's a little bit, I mean, this might not be accurate because of the GFS. It's just, kind of a generality as far as what it's going to do. But, you're still getting that bowing in there, and it looks like it's a little wavy, so you might have some notching in there as well. and that might indicate some of those rotational winds that are getting in there and trying to rotate them into supercells. So you could have some of that development as well. Yeah, see here how the way it kind of bends in like this? This could be a little bit of notching in there. So, you might have some rotational winds that's going into those areas at that point, and so that could have a lot to do with some of the thunderstorm development or the supercell development that's going into that area at that time. So yeah, but all these levels of threat, anyways, they don't seem as high as they were before. The last time that I looked at this system, actually, let me go back frame in the back of that line. Nope. So even though they do, look a little bit higher on the marginal tornado, marginal threat risk. So there is room for some development of some severe storms throughout this. Although the levels of this it doesn't look like, it doesn't look as impressive as I would say for widespread tornado development, widespread outbreak of expansive severe weather here. So it doesn't look as impressive. Not saying that there isn't going to be severe weather. You're probably going to have some high winds with this, very heavy torrential rainfall, possibly some hail, and sometimes at some time frames in different locations. But I think the heaviest of the severe weather right now is what, as far as I'm looking at, is going to be the lower Mississippi Valley and parts of Louisiana. Maybe a little bit of a touch of some of that southern portion of Arkansas, and maybe even as far as some of these far eastern portions of Texas going into that. But right now, they are looking at the severe potential going into Wednesday, I believe. Get back to the correct time frame here. We're looking at Wednesday. So the Midwest is where that's what they have warned. They got the warning for as far as that is concerned for Wednesday, I believe. This is day 3, so we are on Sunday right now, Easter Sunday. Happy Easter, everybody, by the way. And I think this is where I saw the higher levels of tornado risk is out there in the Midwest. And I think that's where I saw those higher levels of severe threat. So I do have some tornado risk going in there. This is in Missouri and kind of the mid to southern portion, Missouri. And then if you look back and kind of this faded green stuff, still have a little bit of a tornado risk. Cap isn't really holding out very well. So there is some severe potential there for these storms to develop out there. All right, let's go next frame. All right, so let's look on the back of this squall line here. And then it just kind of diminishes, it looks like, but as it moves through Missouri, some of these higher precipitation levels, you'd never know how it's going to develop. So it looks like there's a window of time right there, and it looks like all right, so system builds, then it pulls through the area, going through the northeastern portion of Oklahoma, and pretty much all of the eastern portion of Kansas. Where you have marginal severe risks, marginal tornado risks. Let's look on the southern end of that, and the higher precipitation levels. All right, so it looks like the storm is still kind of developing and organizing at this point. Now this is 09Z on the 7th, and I think this is where you're going to get your highest potential for severe weather in the Midwest, going into Missouri and kind of the northeastern portion of Kansas. it looks like for the most part. Let's look behind the low. Nothing really severe with this. So there's a lot of variables that could happen with the system now. Because it's much drier out here in the west, and that's the big issue this year with these storms, and as they develop, is that going into this time of the year in springtime, everything's going to start warming up. You know what I mean? You got a lot of this heat return, and out here in the desert regions and everything with the systems the way that they have been this year with the weather and the climate the way it's been this year, it seems like it's a lot drier out in these desert states. And that dry, as these storms develop and they kind of pull in here, and it seems like they're holding their cap in these midwestern regions fairly efficiently. And then, with that daytime heating, it's harder for them to hold their cap, especially if there's moisture that is prevalent in those areas. So as these systems move to the east, where these states, you know what I mean, you got the southeast states, you got Tennessee, Kentucky, you got the Ohio Valley, and the central portion of the Midwest here, Missouri, Arkansas, even Iowa. These states start to get a lot more moisture as it moves further east. But in these southeast states, this is where you have that warm moisture and that heat that's coming up from the south in these southeast states, even Texas on the eastern side of it, Louisiana. I mean, anybody who said it, who spent a spring or a summer in any of these states, the humidity down here is friggin' brutal, especially in Missouri. I mean, I was in the army, so I went to my AIT in Missouri, and I tell you what, I went there in the summer, and that was the most humid, hottest friggin' summer I've ever I've ever been through. So with all that moisture and all that heat in there, it just makes it makes a playground for severe weather to come out, especially tornadic storms. And as long as you got the wind shear coupled with all of those other dynamics, you know what I mean, you got a breeding ground for tornadoes. And so that's the potential that I'm looking at here, and I'm trying to kind of I'm looking for it in these models to see if it's there, but it doesn't seem as high on the threat scale anyway as I'm seeing. So I'm wondering, and I think that's what the SPC was talking about with capping concerns, because at this point I think it's pretty unpredictable what the cap is going to do, because it seems like these levels out in the Midwest are high enough to maybe form some tornadoes here and there, but it seems like the cap is kind of questionable at this point in my opinion. And then, as it kind of moves further into the east, and this is that line that's kind of breeding in here. Let's see, this is at the front, pretty much, or in the middle of the squall line here. But I mean, none of these levels are really staggeringly severe to me. I mean, there is potential for some severe weather to form, but it looks like the majority of, look at that, wow, wow, not much of a cap there. But you know what I mean, as this kind of goes through, it looks like high winds and heavy rainfall, I would say, is going to be the significant threat here. That LCL is really low, not much of a cap. Got some hail development that's going on there. Kind of a moderate tornado risk, and it's pretty significant. You can have some tornadoes with that. That's moving into Arkansas. Pretty much the same thing all around. Lower Missouri, marginal risk. So, I mean, I'm actively looking for this tornado risk, All right, this is pretty significant. So we're looking here, this is Wednesday at 21Z. So this is on the border of Arkansas going into northern Mississippi. This is that high precipitation region right here that I just selected. And that is a pretty significant, that's kind of significant tornado risk right there, you know what I mean? So you probably could have some tornado development with that. It's a little bit higher on the scale, I would say. You know what I mean? It looks like probable EF2, maybe low end EF3, but I think that that's unlikely, even with that as low as it is. I mean, if it was higher on that spectrum, kind of, then I'd probably be more worried about that. But I'm looking at low end tornado possibility with this. So, got some supercell developments, some hail development that's with this as well. All right, let's look along this line. Okay, so here we go. All right, this is a little bit further south than where I just selected, right along that border of Arkansas, going into northern Mississippi. Now we're going towards more of the mid Mississippi. This is a pretty significant risk here as far as tornado development. I mean, we got a pretty significant hook on this dynamic right here. The updraft is supportive. Um, we got significant supercell development, significant hail probability. I mean, look at our supercell rating here, 10.6. LCL is pretty much on the freaking ground, So we have favorable conditions right now in this frame of data. This is favorable conditions for some pretty sizable tornadoes. All right, so this we're looking at Wednesday. All right, we're looking at Wednesday the 7th at 21Z, and I know that a lot of people don't know Z time very well. So if you look at, you can look up Z time anywhere on the internet. Let's try to find, oh, I think this is the one that I've used before in some of my videos. All right, so we're looking at Wednesday the 7th at 21Z, and you can go on to this right here, and you can look for yourself. If you're in, let's say, the Eastern time, you know what I mean? You're looking at about 4 p.m. All right. So going into the, we're looking at 4 p.m., but this is probably going to begin to develop in the late morning into the early afternoon hours, where you're going to have a little bit of spin-ups and you're going to have some severe weather ahead of this storm coming to your area. This is a probable kind of hour of a window of time around 4 p.m. on the 7th on Wednesday. But this is something that I would worry about a little bit more, and this is kind of on that that border right here is where I selected that, so you can see where that's at. And so all along the center of this line, it looks like from this high precipitation down to the more southern regions, still pretty significant tornado threat, but not as high as in this region right here. Seems like you're getting a little bit more wind shear and development with that, and getting a little bit more supportive systems moving through with that. All right, so in the afternoon hours on Wednesday, now let's look at the south end of that line. Okay, so now we got some significant supercell development right here, significant hail development. Our supercell reading on this is what, 12.9? All right, so this is the window of opportunity here where severe weather is going to be more possible. And it looks like, pretty much all along this line. All right, so let's do the next frame here. All right, and then it seems like that severe potential kind of drapers off here a little bit and gets a little bit weaker. So that would be the window of time right there. I would say late morning to early evening hours, or afternoon hours into about 4 or 5 p.m. So you folks there in Mississippi, Louisiana, you would have to be, I would recommend to be very weather aware that day. It's a pretty sizable tornado threat, so we can definitely look at that. As far as that is concerned, let's look at dew points to see what kind of things that we're looking at here. So this is the same exact time. Your dew points are going to be well over 60 in those areas. That's going to be definitely definitely supportive for supercell and severe weather development in those areas as well. All right, so this is just a brief look. I'll take some more looks at this system as we get closer to the event, but this is a brief look at what is going on with that system. So it looks like there's a window of time in the afternoon on Wednesday where severe potential is probably going to be at its highest with that as well. But I'm going to do some more videos as I'm watching this system kind of trek along and look at the future models for it and see what's going on. And I'll do another video and let you guys know and kind of show you how it's developing. All right. I'd like to thank you all for joining me. Like and subscribe and come back and see some more forecast data, and I'll be looking at it as we get closer to next week. All right. Thank you.